Which new blood? Which new milk? Which new water? All eyes that ever saw me so slaked are now long since dried to dust. Yet I remain. Witness to myself alone.
Welcome to the fourth edition of Ikonen Media Podcast, which is the continuation of Ikonen Magazine, which was in existence from 2002 to 2009. So quite some time back. This is how it looked. It was a cultural magazine on dark lifestyles, not only subcultural, but also focusing on film, literature, and all things interesting. And at that time, I came into contact with very interesting beings all around the world. And I was contacted by many people. And one of those contacts back then was actually the first release by the band AWEN, which reached me. It was included a T-shirt and a small EP. And I thought, well, that's quite interesting. There is something going on in the USA. And you have to know, it's the USA is known for many great things, but not especially for doing neo-folk and military industrial music, which was more of a European specialty. And so it was quite interesting. And I always kept an eye on this band and especially the people involved with it. And today I want to welcome from Dallas, Texas, live, Erin Powell from the band AWEN. Hello.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me and that nice introduction. That was fantastic.
Yeah, it was some years back, as I remember, that we loosely talked about we have to do like a talk, written or recorded talk about our experiences with the Gothic scenes. I say it because it's so varied. And our experiences with subcultures, with music, with having bands actually in the subculture and meeting the cult figures actually of this subculture as well. We will talk about this later as well. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, the first thing which might be interesting to people who, yeah, probably know the band already or have an idea, maybe you can tell us something about where you see yourself now with the band, what you're doing actually now, and then where it comes from.
Sure, yeah. So coming from Texas, as you said, it's not known really for doing experimental martial industrial neo-folk music. So we've always been kind of a fish out of water here in Texas. I think of us as a Texas project and a European project because Per Nilsson in the band is from Stockholm, Sweden originally. He's been here in the States for decades. And my wife, Katrine, she was born in Germany and her mother's from Berlin and her father was American. So there's that European connection. But I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, and have lived in Texas all of my life. And my mother's from Vermont, so I don't necessarily sound like a Texan, but I guarantee that I am. And there's kind of a funny story about that. When I came home from first grade, I was learning the alphabet, and the teacher had a very thick Texas accent, and she taught us the alphabet in a song, and I was confused because I thought there were two letters N in the alphabet because she taught it to us as W, X, Y, and Z. And so when I came home and I sang that for my mom, she looked horrified and she said, "Oh, honey, don't speak that way. People will think you're stupid." So that I kept that in mind, not to get a thick Texas accent.
So do you remember when you first came into contact with subcultural phenomena and structures, and at which time, especially?
Sure, yeah. Well, growing up in the 80s, I was born in 1978. So in the early 80s, we had cable television, and I was able to see some things. I think I caught Night Flight, the show Night Flight, a few times in the US, which showed some new wave things and stuff. But that wasn't regular. I was getting mostly MTV and things like that, which I liked the look of some of the heavy metal bands, but the music and the sound didn't really speak to me. It was kind of an image thing, but then it was disappointing. So one of the first bands that I got really interested in and started collecting the cassette tapes, remember those, was
Yeah.
The Cure. And so I went to the record stores and things and with my own money and just bought all these Cure cassettes that I could find. And I went down a rabbit hole with that. And then, meeting up with friends in school, I was the only one. In the 80s, as a kid, I'm saying as a kid, 10 and younger, 11, 12, 13, it was so hard to find black clothing in the United States
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I remember
for
such
younger
things as well.
people. Yeah. And so, they didn't have some silly design of a cartoon lizard or something on it, just finding something all black. So I would have to get clothes that were made for older people, and that would be like a baggy or black shirt, button-up shirt or something, and roll it up and stuff. So, there weren't very many people that were trying to look a little bit different back then. So the few of us that found each other, we would get a little social network together and share. What's your favorite band? Oh, I really like The Cure. Okay, you like The Cure. Have you heard of Susie and the Banshees? Have you heard of New Order? Have you heard of the Smiths? So that's how it happened back then. All this is, of course, before the internet. But that was my first inkling of finding things that, I mean, you think The Cure now today is not necessarily an underground band, but to a kid in Texas in the 80s,
Yeah,
that was an underground band.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's interesting because you were born in 1978, you said?
Correct.
I was born a little bit earlier in 1971. That makes me probably one subcultural generation earlier than you are. So
Yeah,
still not the first generation for this context.
sure.
Actually, I would have been old enough, probably being 12 or so, to realize which bands were there in 1983. But I
Yeah,
was listening to German new wave songs. I probably have heard like Duff, der Mussolini back then, but that
yeah,
was kind of rare. I realized Depeche Mode when I was young, but actually
yeah.
the first band I got into, and that might be a difference, was Kiss. I
Kids.
and
Okay. Yeah.
even being 9 or 10 years old, I dressed up as Gene Simmons and stuff like that with the corpse paint
Yeah.
styles.
Yeah.
And so
Proto corpse paint. Yeah.
yeah, that might be my first step into this direction.
Okay.
But musically, I was very early interested in David Bowie and Tangerine Dream. And David Bowie, I was a real fan from
Sure.
11 or 12 on. I bought my first record, which was Let's Dance back then. But
Okay.
I
Yeah.
was a huge
Yeah.
fan of the soundtrack of Christiane F.,
Sure.
the cult film, which I
Hmm.
still appreciate very much, and it's a huge, extremely influential soundtrack for me.
Yeah.
And Tangerine Dream, I mentioned that, and John Carpenter, actually. John Carpenter's film music was
Yes.
very early, like when I was 12, 13. I began buying this stuff as well, having seen The Fog on TV and so on.
Oh, that's
Literature,
interesting.
sorry?
That's interesting. Not to interrupt you, but that's interesting that at a young age, watching the film,
Yeah,
you were so fascinated by the music that you went and sought out the soundtrack.
absolutely. I did, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
And
Wow.
this was, I mean, you know the soundtrack probably very, very
Sure.
well,
Sure.
and
Sure.
it's quite some electro gothic music,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I was never aware of this real subculture, if that there was a subculture, and later I realized, okay, it wasn't known as gothic; it was still called wave or dark wave back then in Germany.
Hmm.
And it came from the post-punk background, so some of these people were still considered being punk. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I've seen the first yeah, probably wave girls in dance school, because it was usual to go to dance school, very bourgeois thing to do. And there were those two girls in black clothing and with combed up hair. And I said, oh, that's amazing. I want to come to know these girls. And there was no chance, no chance for me. I was really this nerdy film fan guy.
uh,
Um,
and like
and
bright colored sweaters or something. Very,
yeah,
very
I
80s,
mean,
new 80s.
I always dressed in worn down denim and probably already black shirt or something like that, but not
Okay,
subcultural in any way, not styled
sure,
in any way.
sure,
And
sure.
I think that came when I was like 16. It came all at the same time. A guy gave me a tape of Sisters of Mercy, which I
Hmm.
really liked, and I still like this tape very much.
Yeah.
And then I entered a video store, and video stores in Germany were mainly for adults only. And I was 16, but I looked a little bit older, so
Oh
they not
wow.
only let me in, they hired me as a store clerk, and I worked in this video store when I was under 18. And
Wow.
this was very important because one of those who ran the store was she was post-punk gothic already, and she had
Yeah.
all those great records. And the second thing is, I was a huge fan of Dario Argento's films, and
Mhm.
on the soundtracks of Dario Argento's films, especially on the Demons films by Lamberto Bava, which he presented, there
Yeah.
already were songs by bands like Love and Rockets and Dead Can Dance and The Smiths and so on. So
Wow.
it came all at this time that I was aware, okay, this is the world I want to enter. And
Wow.
this
That's so
woman,
interesting.
yeah,
Being a film nut introduced you into some
yeah,
Gothic music
definitely.
as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
And probably The Hunger with the title song. I didn't even get the idea that Bela Lugosi's Dead might be a single by a certain band. I just realized, hey, it's the title song of The Hunger. It's great. And
Yeah.
later I realized, oh, it's this Bauer song. It's from 1979, probably the first proper Gothic rock song, and so on. So this was mid 80s in a way. And
Yeah.
Fields of the Nephilim was the band I was most impressed on the Demons 2's soundtrack. And they came on tour. And so I realized, oh, they look really cool with their apocalyptic cowboy clothing. I want to
Yeah.
look like that. And then
So much dust on
yeah,
everything.
absolutely. We used baby powder because it
Yeah.
smelled okay. And it was really steady on the clothing. But
Now terror EBM bands do that. You know,
I
cover
think so.
themselves
Yeah.
in the baby powder. Combi cries to people like that. I
Oh
see.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. It
Yeah.
looks cool.
Yeah.
Um, but that was probably the last step then, and then I entered the I think the Frankfurt area Gothic scene in Germany around 1989 and 90.
Yeah.
And when I was already 18, 19 years old, and so yeah, it was very fast that I got into the scene, and I developed the urge to put records on, to become a
Yeah.
DJ in the scene. And this worked out, I think, in 1992. So, at that time, oh, there's one thing I want to add now.
Yeah.
A guy in school, he realized, okay, this guy, he's a nerd like I am, and he collects this music now. And he gave me two records, Christ and the Pale Queens by Current 93, which
Wow.
was my first record by Current 93, which I heard.
That's that's a fantastic one. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Brown Book by Death in June. So
Wow.
those two, he gave me these, and I was totally lost. I said, okay, there's Fields of the Nephilim, and then there's Current 93 and Death in June.
Yes.
And this is my world.
The gateway drug records.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it sounds like your timeline is very similar to mine, and I'm probably about 7 years after you. When you said about 92 when you started to DJ and do all that stuff, it was probably about 98 for me.
I see.
And I didn't discover the more obscure stuff like this with real death rock, gothic rock bands, and then the neo folk, apocalyptic folk we called it back then in the 90s.
Oh,
I didn't
sure, sure. I still call it that.
I didn't discover that stuff until high school when I had a girlfriend who had a friend of hers in Florida named Chantel, and she was a dominatrix, and she was into all of this stuff, and she would send her mixtapes of new albums that she'd gotten at the time, and she was playing these mixtapes, going, "Oh, she's." I was like, what's this music that we're hearing right now?" She was like, "Oh, it's some weird band from England, that she put on this tape." And I was listening to this stuff, and I just got so obsessed that even after we broke up, I kept the mixtapes. And thanks to social media on MySpace and Facebook, I got in touch with Chantel, and we met for the first time when I opened up for Death in June in Austin, Texas. She came from Florida and was at the concert, so that was really nice. It just kind of came full circle for me.
Yeah, it makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah, you need actually people introducing to these things because back then, yes, you said there was no internet. There were
Sure.
some magazines. I remember there was in America, there was the Propaganda magazine, for example, and
Yeah.
Propaganda covered all kinds of different yeah, bands connected to the Gothic scene. And I think there was one issue about Death in June and Fields of the Nephilim, which no one
Yep.
connected naturally, except me, probably. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, they did.
Yeah. Fred Berger with Propaganda magazine
Yeah,
is fantastic. I think everybody, coming up in the 90s owes him a large debt of gratitude. And he had the Totenkopf on as the magazine
yeah,
logo, and
that's the logo. Yeah,
I saw that before I heard Death in June. And so and then once I heard Death in June and I saw the album art, I was like, oh, well, I recognize that. And that's before I knew, the historical connotation of it all.
yeah.
So yeah, there's a definite, you know, connection in there, and bless him for covering that stuff too, because I think it really brought awareness about these kinds of bands to America that
Yeah.
that wasn't happening until later, and maybe wouldn't have happened without his influence. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he was important, and I think Douglas mentioned it in some interview as well, that
Hmm.
he's
Hmm.
very thankful to this connection as well.
Yeah.
In Germany, it happened earlier because I remember the three-piece tour with Current 93, Death in June, and Sword Invictus, which I
Hmm.
saw at Frankfurt in 1990, I guess, um, which, yeah, left a real mark, obviously. And then they returned very often I think Germany was a good place to
Yeah.
be at that time. But I also traveled regularly twice a year to London because
Okay.
it was possible to do that, to finance that as a student. It was not as expensive as it became later, and it was still
Sure.
attractive to buy CDs and records and books and films there, and also clothing, because in clothing was like in even in fetish clubs in London, it was incredible. And
Yeah.
also I met in 19, that's a cool story, you'll like it. In 1991, I was the first time in the Torture Garden Club,
Oh, great.
run by David Wood. And I entered there, and I had to be introduced because you were not able to go there outside of the club and so on. But I got in, and there was a guy at the in front of the toilets with full camouflage clothing, and I came to him and said, "You're Douglas P, aren't you?" And he said, "Yes." And so we began talking, and he gave
And it
me.
was him.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was him, and
Wow.
he was there. He was a regular attendant at the Torture Garden, and he played there with Boyd Rice later, as you probably
Yeah.
know. So,
Yeah.
and David Wood was always into this. I interviewed David Wood as well for Ikonen magazine later about
Mhm.
the fetish for German uniforms, which is quite interesting in that context as well. So, yeah, and Douglas gave me some interesting advice and and tips, hints to go shopping in London and so on. So
Oh, great.
that
Yeah.
was quite interesting. And there's another thing. One time I realized that one of the students I knew from University of Mainz, where I was studying back then, cultural anthropology and theater, that she was named Christine, and she sometime at a certain time she told me she used to be together with David Tibet, and she is, because her name refers to it, she is Christ Thorn, and
Oh, okay.
so he made the Silence as Christine song for her, and
Wow.
I visited London with her. It was a completely different experience because we stayed at the home of Julie Wood, for example, who
Sure.
played violin back then for
Nice.
33. So very fascinating times at that
Yeah.
mid-90s, I would say.
Yeah, that was the golden age for all of
Mm.
those people working together.
Yeah.
And that's amazing that you got to be in their little inner sanctum, it sounds like.
Yeah, on the edges.
Okay.
I moved around the edges. And
Yeah.
yeah, what could be interesting there? I started playing music as a DJ, and I was already in contact with people playing music live as well, especially
Yeah.
one post-punk band called LSD, who never made a record, unfortunately, but they sounded a little bit like Joy Division. And
Okay.
so I was in the rehearsal room, but
a lot of people wanted to back then.
absolutely,
They
absolutely.
were one of those germinating bands that just like people heard it and they were like, it was like Sex Pistols 2.0. Like people were like, I want to do that, you know.
Yeah,
Sisters of Mercy too in the Gothic scene, I would say. You know, there were so many bands off the Sisters tree in the 90s. A lot of
yeah,
people forget about that. People make jokes about neofolk and say it's derivative. Well, those people weren't around in the 90s for the goth scene to see all the bands that wanted to
oh
sound
yeah.
like Andrew.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I never came up with the idea of doing music myself. I don't know why. I played music as a DJ, and I had this really weird mix from apocalyptic folk to industrial metal in the end. So I somehow listened to all of these things, and with some
Yeah.
industrial in the sense of power electronics thrown in and so on,
Yeah.
because you always had a mixture of those people as well in the clubs. So it
Like
was
the
rarely.
Ant Zen label type
It
music.
began in that time, yeah, in
Sure.
that age. But the thing is that all of this specialized very much, and then became its own scenes. So you have
Yeah.
rhythmic industrial, as opposed to Gothic rock, as opposed to power electronics, who never wanted to have something in common with these
Yeah.
like romantic Gothic context, but they
Sure.
realized, okay, there's a lot of people also from both scenes who
Yeah.
connected at the concerts as well. So I think the 90s was a weird mixture of things, and this divided in different directions later.
Yeah. Speaking of power noise as opposed to power electronics, right?
Yeah,
Different thing, some similar frequencies, but
yeah.
different genres for sure. And Zen, I was part of the group that I was with in Dallas, doing DJs and concert promotions in the 2000s. It was a group called Synergy. We brought bands to town also, and we brought Winterkalte and Asha and Morgenstern
Hmm.
to Dallas to
Hmm.
play, and those guys were fantastic. I took uh, the guy and his girlfriend, Asha and Morgenstern, out to Fort Worth to the Water Gardens, where they filmed part of Logan's Run, the movie Logan's Run.
Ah, cool. Yeah,
So those concrete steps that seem to go down forever
yeah.
into the pool, that's a real place and it's still there.
Wow.
And there's reflecting pools around there. Before I could tell him anything, he's German, and it was a hot summer day. He just starts taking his shirt off, and I turn around and before I could tell him no, he's jumped into the water and he's swimming around in it. And I was like, oh, bums bathe in that and pee in it, don't you know? He'd already jumped in, so I didn't share that with him. I was like, well, they don't really want you to swim here, And he's like, oh, it's no problem. I'm like, well, maybe you want to get
I'll
out.
become one. That's strange, because I know both of them very well
Yeah,
when they were
yeah,
still called Ars Moriendi. Ars Moriendi was the source band, which became then Asche and Morgenstern.
uh-huh.
And I filmed them actually when they performed in a club near Frankfurt at Das Rind. And
Okay,
this video is also, it was published because back then tapes were published, obviously, and
yeah,
videotapes as well. So this is the performance there. It was probably the first video I made, which was
okay.
actually sold. Yeah. And today
Oh,
videos are not sold anymore. They are just shown for free on the internet. But that's
sure, yeah.
yeah. So this
Well,
exists.
well, give them my regards from the guy who took them to the water gardens and forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I will. That's
And
interesting.
for his performance, he wanted a leather trench coat, and I had one in a bullwhip, and I couldn't find him a bullwhip because he'd just come out with that album Distorted Disco, and he had done the song Kiss the Whip. So I got the trench coat, but yeah, again, eternal apologies for not finding a bullwhip in Texas in time for it.
I wouldn't believe that.
I know, right? You'd think they'd be everywhere, wouldn't
Yeah.
you?
Oh, that's
but,
great.
but but yeah, getting back to what you said something earlier about
Yeah.
pre-internet, you really had to know somebody who could kind of show you the ropes,
Mm.
and I think that's true, and I think that people that like us that found this stuff early, we had to really become kind of autodidacts. You had to jump into it, and you had to have like a passion for learning about it. You
Mm.
would buy the record. Speaking for myself anyway, you would buy the album, and you would search all the liner notes and see who these people are. What is this about? Who do they know? Who's on this record? Oh, they're on this record now. What other albums are they on? And then it would just kind of open up a world of associations for you, which I fear now is maybe not the case with so many people getting their music just from downloads and things. There's no liner notes in a download, so you really
Sure,
have
yeah.
to they have
And
to
no
have a
real
passion.
artwork.
No real artwork. There's not a tangible thing so much. And vinyl's gotten popular
Mm.
again,
Mm.
but that's a separate conversation because it's so hard to get an album pressed, and so many small labels are having to deal with the majors doing, the 35th reissue of Fleetwood Mac's album or something.
Mm.
So the pressing plants are backed up. But cassettes and things, physical media is important, I think. But I don't know, the younger generation getting into goth now, I worry that they have enough passion to learn the history of it. Is it important to them? I don't know. I would hope so.
It's interesting because at least 3 books were now published in England. The John Robb History of Goth, and then another one, and one by Lowell Tolhurst of The Cure. And so there is a conscience of the history, the musical history relevance of goth
Yeah.
bands, and especially John Robb's book, which I really would recommend, also features all the connected bands from the edges, like Laibach, for example.
Oh,
In
great.
the goth scene, Laibach were always very important and very much liked, but
Sure.
obviously they are no goth band. That's for
Right.
sure.
Right.
And
Right.
I know that when you talk to Ivan, he's like, really, okay, industrial might work, but goth, it's totally far away from Laibach. And it
Yeah.
is from the concept, but they are important, and a lot of bands are important for the scene which wouldn't consider themselves being goth, obviously, and so
Right.
also
Well, that's the old joke, isn't it? Like
yeah.
all of these guys in these bands never called themselves goth. If you're really goth, you don't call yourself goth.
Mm.
Well, I don't I don't take with that really. I mean, I consider myself goth. That's fine. I'll take that. I'll take that title. It's part of it's a subculture that I came up out of. So I'm not going to disown that at all. I think it's important.
Yeah, I would agree on that. I wouldn't say that the music could even exist without this upbringing in a certain Gothic subculture. And
Yeah.
I had idea and a definition of what goth could be before I even knew about the subculture, because I very early started to read Edgar Allan Poe, Bram Stoker,
Yep.
stuff like
Yep.
that. I was aware of the Hammer horror films, of the Universal monster films.
Sure.
So it always was something which was important in my life, even before the subculture. And then when I first entered the goth club, the first time in my life, there was a girl in a white wedding dress with a doll in her hand dancing to De Profundis, the song by Dead Can Dance. And I
Oh,
said,
fantastic.
all right, I was totally
I,
lost. Yeah,
I'm home.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm home
Yeah.
finally.
Yeah.
So that was the Negative Club at Frankfurt, if someone should ask.
Oh,
And
great.
it was probably in '89.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
There's an aesthetic that's there, and that's what it's all about is the aesthetic, really. And that's I felt the same way whenever I heard atmospheric, dark music like Dead Can Dance and things. Then I was like, that's the aesthetic that I love from literature. That's the aesthetic that I love from paintings like Caspar David Friedrich. This is turned into sound, and it's beautifully expressed. And again, once I discovered it, I was like, okay, now I went down a rabbit hole
Mm,
of these dark ambient neoclassical folkish artists.
mm. I I think I was always searching for something which is darker than the stuff which was well known, and
Yeah.
so it was like a revelation to finally listen to Christ and the Pale Queens record, which we talked about, by
Hmm.
Current 93, because in its minimalism, it's so radically dark, and
Yeah.
so it really absorbed me. And for me, this was the darkest you could get.
Yeah.
At that time. And probably this is, for me, it always worked in this context. And yeah, as we said, the musicians would never consider themselves being part of the scene, but they well realize how important they were. And
Sure.
I mean, later concerts from the folkish context or the military industrial contexts, it's all ex-goth people now dressing up differently.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of I think so. Yeah. So they came from the rock and roll, the gothic rock kind of thing, and they wanted something different, something that was maybe a little more academic, something that was a little more grown up. And so
Mm,
they gravitated to these things where it's not dance music, it's not rock and roll, but it's something that's a little more elevated on
mm,
maybe a little higher intellectual plane.
mm.
And I think it's a natural progression, really,
Yeah,
my personal opinion.
I would say as well. I think for me it was quite kind of parallel, but I moved to and fro probably. There were certain phases where I focused on this or the other
Sure.
part of the music, but it depends on personal history probably as well. And
Hmm.
but I kept everything with me till today, and it just got
Yeah.
wider. And as you said, I was never interested in heavy metal culture in the '80s.
Right.
I would
Right.
have been there at the right time, at the right place, but I was not
Yeah.
interested. I didn't even realize the like the scandal aspects of Norwegian black metal in the
Yeah.
'90s. I read about it, but I was not really fascinated by all of this. But later, like during the last 15 years, I more and more became interested in certain aspects of the metal scene, like Wolves in the Throne Room, atmospheric black metal bands. And
Right.
so this also added, and it became bigger and bigger what I'm interested in. And the influences
Yeah.
became more varied in a way. I probably moved a little bit away from the industrial sound,
Yeah.
but I realized that listening to my own stuff from time to time, well, to remember what did I do back then, I realized, okay, also there are huge industrial influences in certain songs, like in certain Vortex songs. There are yeah, like punch effects, which are clearly power electronics effects and so on. But
Yeah.
for me, it's always the idea to get all of this, like a gathering of all styles, which I seem
Yeah,
appropriate for a certain topic. And I see that in your work as well. Would you agree?
I think so. Yeah, I think, what we do creatively, we're kind of the sum of our influences, really. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, I would say that Wes in AWEN, he comes from a metal background. I was never particularly into metal, except for some of the early wave of British heavy metal, back in
Hmm.
the 80s. I liked some songs by Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, things like that. But I wouldn't say that for me, metal is so much of an influence. But yeah, definitely, you know, things that would be considered Gothic and industrial music play a part. Sequencing, there's some sparse sampling that I do. I do all of the samples and field recordings that end up used in our music.
Hmm.
But Per in the band, he was in an industrial metal band too. I should mention called Puncture back in
Hmm.
the late '80s, early '90s, and they toured with Gwar and Electric Hellfire Club and
Hmm.
people like.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's Wes and Per bring an influence of that into it for sure. Katrine's favorite band is Depeche Mode. So
I see.
so that maybe somebody can hear some elements of that and her vocal styling. She's got a much better note hitting singing voice than I do. I leave all of the anything that requires notes. She can do that.
So you're the chanting guy.
I'm the chanting, droning. Oh,
Hmm.
I can do
Yeah,
that, but anything that requires notes and progressions and things like that, that's her department, and she does a great job.
for sure. There's one interesting thing before we come to your collaboration with like certain iconic figures. I have to mention that there was a discussion in Germany, which you might be aware of, about the like right-wing tendencies in certain parts of the Gothic scene, especially focusing on certain bands like Death in June, because of
Yeah,
the camouflage uniforms, of some context in songs, some buzzwords, and probably the past of certain members of the band, and so
yeah,
on. There is very provocative stuff by Boyd Rice, for example, even some song lyrics on the Boyd Rice and Friends record, which was hugely in discussion. The use of like German war songs in Current 93's Imperium album. All these
yeah,
things were very much in critical discussion in Germany and led to dividing within the scenes, like one part distancing from it and the other part like defending it in a way, and some
right,
people in between. And
right,
as I was very much aware of all these things, and I would never say there is nothing to this. There is something to it, but it's not what it seems. And probably
sure,
we can talk about this. But it's not now, I don't want to defend or to change anything. I just want to say it came to a climax in the Wave Gothic Treff in 2000, which broke down in a way, but also escalated on those allegedly political conflicts. And there were even people attacked at that time. And there
wow,
was
I didn't know that.
yeah, there were like stones were thrown, and
At the vegete
yeah,
itself.
yeah,
Wow,
towards visitors. And
wow,
I saw some of this as well personally. It's not like just
yeah,
being talked about. And
that's terrible.
the other thing is there was, for example, when Death in June played at Batsch Cup in Frankfurt, there was
Hmm.
the tour bus was set on fire actually. Um, yeah,
Jeez.
you will find news reports on this as well.
Oh,
And
I'm sure,
this was very much defended by the people being critical of the bands as well. So they found that's
of course.
okay for them as well.
We're justified to attack people and destroy
Yeah.
property. No,
So
yeah,
that was quite a wild time to
yeah.
deal with these things. And at that time, I actually started the Ikonen magazine as well, which was kind of subtly probably controversial for some, but I think I managed to find a certain way, probably a kind of academic way to deal with these things still today.
Sure.
I also published a book recently called Black Schwarz,
Okay.
which is about the dark aspects of pop culture, and it also features everything we talked about till now,
Oh, great.
and some things on films and dark ambient music as well, and so on. So
Fantastic.
my question would be now, what was the situation in the US as you were in this context, especially? How did you experience probably critical situations, or is it totally different?
Are you talking about in relation to my work with AWEN or in relation to my work with the artists that we've mentioned?
Probably both.
Okay. Um, yeah, I played with Death in June twice, opening for them in Austin and in Chicago. And at both of those events, I think that was 2014, at both of those events, there was no issue inside the concert hall.
Mhm.
No issue at all in Texas with the people coming into the concert. I heard in Chicago that there was one person that was attacked leaving the show, but I never saw any protesters or anything out there. Alwyn has been pretty lucky in not getting any kind of real flack uh, from the Antifa or anything like that. There's nothing political in what we do. We don't use any thing from any kind of controversial era in
Yeah,
history
true. Hmm.
within our art. But we're associated. I'm friends with the people that we've been talking about. So I hear from other people that within Texas, they're like, "Oh, Alwyn, that band. Well, you know about them, But
Hmm.
these people rarely have the guts to come up and ask you about it. We did have one show where after I brought Boyd Rice to Texas to play. He was supposed to play at the Texas Theater, which is the place where Lee Harvey Oswald was caught after killing Kennedy.
Hmm.
And that was going to be fantastic because it's a great venue and it's a historic location, not just because of the Oswald connection, but it's just a great old theater. Um, and but the person that booked it decided to promote the show as Boyd Rice, the most controversial artist of the 20th century. And so the most left-leaning people in Dallas were like, well, why is he controversial? And then, of course, here comes Google and,
I see.
articles that he'd written, for a magazine called Answer Me, which was a joke, where I have a theory on that particular article for Answer Me that it was a parody of a manifesto written by the woman that attacked Andy Warhol.
Yeah,
But I can't
the
put
Scum
word.
Manifesto
Yes,
by Valerie
and
Solanas.
yes, and the thing that the people that wanted the show shut down were bringing up the penis envy article, which if you compare the two, it's
Yeah.
obviously
Oh,
a
yeah,
parody
that's
of
true.
that.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to hear that explanation. They didn't want to hear this. They were like, no, he's going to be violent to women when he's here, and nobody feels safe, and so that's fine. So that was canceled. I rescheduled it at a private venue, and once people heard that it was being rescheduled at a private venue, they wanted to get that shut down too. But I organized it in such a way that everybody had to contact me individually in order to get tickets, and nobody knew who else was coming to the concert, and you had to prove who you were when you came in the door. No buying a ticket to come in. And it went off without a hitch, and it was very well attended. And people were really angry about it after that. They didn't want it to happen. The small
Mm.
thing, and it split the Dallas scene in half. It really did, probably about in half, because there were fights
Hmm.
about it online. People saying no censorship.
Hmm.
People saying this is one of the founders of industrial music, which is true.
Which is true.
And why don't you want us to go see one of the founders of industrial music? I can make up my own mind.
Hmm.
And then other people saying no, he's dangerous, nobody needs to hear it. So it became this whole schismatic thing that I didn't try to do. But a couple years later, we were playing a concert, and I found out that the sound guy that was working at this particular venue did not like us for this reason, for me having brought Boyd. And he was making comments all night to us, and I finally I told him, I was like, look, what's the deal here? And we had a conversation, and he had a lot of wrong ideas about things, and I put him straight, and I said, now why didn't you come and talk to me first?
Mm.
And he agreed at the end. He was like, you're right, I should have talked to you, I'm sorry. That rarely happens, but it did that night. So I was thankful for that. I think a lot of people are so divided on identity politics now, that in Trump in the United States, that just magnified everything. And so, everybody's looking for the boogeyman, next door, and everybody wants to go on a witch hunt for people that don't think the way that they do, or that they think don't think the way that they do. And it's a shame, really, especially when it comes to art. Leave art alone. Let people enjoy the art that they want to enjoy, as long as it's not hurting somebody else. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I completely understand. The club where I used to DJ in the early 90s, the Scarabeus Club at Ingelheim, it had all of them performing. It was Boyd Rice, Strength Through Joy, Death in June, Current, Sol Invictus several times, but also Shadow Project, Gitan Demon, and other people from the American Gothic background. And
Ross Williams.
Ross Williams was there, actually. Yeah. And that, for me, it was incredible. I was the DJ. I was like playing before and after their concerts, and I came to know all these people. And I met Gitan Demon several times, but actually the first time in Amsterdam, where she worked at the Cult Videotheek, the store, which was the foundation for the LA-based Cult Epics label now. Because she was connected to the owner, Nico. And he was the guy who managed Ross Williams later, and has the rights for a lot of his work. And
Nico B.
Nico Broesma, yeah.
He did the Pig film, right?
Yeah, he did it. Yeah.
Right.
And I met him in LA in 2019, and he led us to the grave, like the columbarium where Ross Williams is buried, the ashes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also a huge fan of Ross Williams, obviously.
Same here. Same here.
I thought that.
That's the best Christian death is Ross Williams.
Absolutely. And so in the beginning of the 90s, it was kind of controversial, but nobody really cared, because there's a small club and some controversial people are playing there, and nobody really cared. But this changed probably then around 2000. There was the peak, and then it kind of is uneven till today, but it's still possible, or it's again possible to do concerts in Germany with all kinds of bands now. And probably there are some buzz names now, but most people forgot about the rest, probably. And for me, it's also
let them forget.
Yeah, the thing is that the younger generation, which you mentioned before, and I will not talk negatively about this, because they are different, but they have different experiences and wishes and desires and anything. But younger goths are not really interested in dealing with apocalyptic folk from the 90s, or they don't really get what this is about. They might be fine with very commercial stuff, or even like Rammstein or something like that, or they have this influence, and then they get really specialized in things. That's what I observe at the moment.
And I think too, that's that insular internet thing where you go down a rabbit hole for certain bands, and you're only going to find things associated with certain bands, rather than like we were talking about, somebody being a mentor with somebody in the scene, where they make you a mixtape. Oh, you like this? Well, I've heard about this, and this, and you get 12 bands to look at that might be radically different sounding. So I don't know, that's a Spotify thing. Spotify, I think, groups certain types and sounds together. You can't rely on Spotify to be a mentor to you to introduce new music necessarily. I mean, I had to recently get a Spotify thing because I got a new car and it doesn't play any physical media, so
Oh, that's
I had to
tragic.
have I know I had to have streaming music in my vehicle for the first time, so I got Spotify. But I started putting in all varied things, and it was recommending some really odd stuff. But sometimes you do get something that it recommends that's actually all right, but it's still not the same as having somebody try
Yeah,
to direct you down a path.
yeah. And the best thing was people with mail orders, which you were able to physically visit at their place.
Yes,
Because there was
yes,
a legendary mail order called Artware Records in Wiesbaden, just around across the river from my place. And
uh-huh.
the woman who ran that mail order, Donna, she died several years ago, tragically. But
Oh,
she always was very open to let me listen to stuff like for hours. And she did her
right.
work, and I sat there and was listening to really all varieties of dark ambient ritual music stuff. I was skipping through magazines, so I found some of the propaganda magazines as well, which she imported. So that was a
Fantastic
place.
resource. And you got to experience them in a tactile manner.
Yeah,
They're,
absolutely.
they're in an atmosphere, in a total atmosphere,
Mm.
and that's not the same as surfing on web
Yeah.
pages.
Yeah, and that's probably the reason why, as I think for some people, it's not understandable why you would um, deal with some controversial stuff, which brings you into trouble as a musician
Yes,
or anything,
yeah,
um, because they never experienced what these things do with you when you really deal with them, with when you
true.
really listen to it, when you like read the interviews, listen to the record at the same time, and you meet people who are really intelligent and inspiring people, and then you meet the musicians, which are not everyone, but most of them are kind of inspiring people and great to
Yeah,
talk to. And
very
you don't
charismatic.
have to share
Yeah,
those things. You don't have to share everything
right.
to get along with certain people. So that's what most critical people don't understand about this, I guess.
Yeah, and then there's also the element of well, people that are worried about what other people think. Well, I would never put any rules to my artwork. Well, if that's part of your religion, if that's part of your worldview, if that's part of your mystical obsession, and if it holds power for you, then of course it needs to be expressed within your art. And I've used runes in my work, and I would never shy away from it or try to make apologies for having used runes within my work. But I've heard
Mm,
people say things like that,
mm.
other artists and other people. Well,
Yeah.
what do you expect? You put runes on things. Shut up.
Talking about this, the elements of pagan culture.
Yes. Hmm.
Um, how important is like the pagan aspect for the band AWEN?
Absolutely. Yeah. I am a heathen mystic. So I'm always looking into the history, prehistory of Europe, and the what the ancient rites and rituals might have been, because we don't know, and that's and
Yeah.
that's the thing. That's the shame, is that all of this stuff is just by necessity recreationist.
Mm.
We have artifacts, we have runestones, we have things that are dug up from graves, we have torques, we have elements of the artwork, but we don't have the key that tells us what all of these things originally meant and what they were originally meant to do, what their
Mm.
purpose was. And so many of these cultures didn't write anything down, until later, when the Christians or the Romans came into
Right.
contact with them. There's so much lost because it was all verbal. And there's arguments about that too. The Druids, how advanced could they have been if they didn't have a written language? Well, that's not necessarily true. And some of the holiest secrets, I think, were probably verbal in order to protect them, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Not all information is for everybody. if that makes sense, especially your enemies. So if there's something that's really a powerful message or something that really is a key to your culture, maybe you don't want everybody to know it. And so you have it be lips to ear only, you know. But in short, to answer your question, it's very important.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guessed that, but I was interested to hear that actually, in which way. And yeah, because symbolism is one thing, and to see it connected with certain content and a worldview probably is something different. And not all bands are beyond playing with things. So it's always interesting to talk about this.
And I should add too that my interests in pagan culture and prehistory are not exclusive to Europe. Also, you know, indigenous peoples around the world fascinate me, and comparative mythology, comparative history is very important to me as well. I think that there's something powerful to learn from that, you know, and not necessarily always what's so similar, but what is dissimilar. What does that teach us? You know, where do these things come from? Where do these stories, where do these symbols, where do these images come from? It's electricity for me.
That's absolutely the reason why I studied cultural anthropology in the past, and because this idea of comparing religious contexts and religious systems was really opening a lot of doors for me, and it's still the foundation for the concepts I work with, because with Vortex, which is my ritual music project, it's always concept albums focusing on certain mythical aspects. Like there's the mythical trilogy beginning with Kali Yuga, then Moloch, and the third one is As Gods Fall, the Ragnarok album. And then there's Helios, about the sun mythology, all kinds of different cultures dealing with sun mythology. And so this is, for me, it's a never ceasing source of inspiration to deal with all kinds of cultural concepts. And yeah, as you mentioned, we know not very much about this, and there's not much written, and you said it. So we have to experience things on our own. And one way to do that is setting up live musical rituals. And that's what I do when we do most of the time it's me and Oliver, who plays guitar with Vortex and Mars. Both Mars is our band which we do together, and Vortex, he is a guest musician, a steady musician playing there. So we try to perform a pagan ritual which connects to the dedicated people in the audience, and it works incredibly well, because most of the time you really get the people. After like 10 minutes or so, they are really focused, and it's really fascinating. It's really rewarding to do that.
Great. But yeah, you know, a lot of people wonder, you know, what is the difference between a worldview that's pagan and a worldview that's not? And to me, I think it really comes down to, do you see yourself as within nature or outside of it?
Yeah.
Do you believe in mysteries, or do you think that there's one answer? And I think if you see yourself outside of nature and you think that there are no mysteries and there's one answer, that is people think that it's a strong view to take, but it's actually a very vulnerable one, because we know that steel, if it's tempered, it needs to be mixed with other things to be flexible. If it's too strong, it snaps, doesn't it? Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if you have to understand that you don't have the answers to everything, and be open to always questioning things, I think, in order to grow and get any kind of fulfillment from it. And I definitely see myself within nature and recognizing mysteries.
Have you did some hiking when you were in the Frankfurt area? Because we have these huge monuments from the Celtic and the Roman past. Have you seen some of
Yes,
this?
yes. Karsten, our friend Karsten Hopp, took us around, and we saw the Roman fort
Oh
that's
yeah,
there.
the Saalburg.
Yes, yes. I've been there twice now with him, and that's really nice. And we also outside of Frankfurt, but we did some hiking around Heidelberg
Hmm.
and stuff too. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's hiking with Germans. If you're an American, get ready for it. I'll say.
I heard some things about this. Okay, I see.
You start early and you keep up. You know, you're falling behind. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2.
And to eat and drink must have been earned.
Yes, exactly. We're not having rest breaks, you know. Nope. Kein Pause.
That's great. If you're here again in the area around the Saalburg,
Yeah,
the castle, there is a former fortresses of the Celts, which are much
yeah.
older, and they are in the forests, and it's some amazing, very magical places around here. I do it all the
Right,
time. You probably sometimes you see my photos, and this
right.
is all around this area actually. Yeah. So
Fantastic.
it's within 1 hour probably, and there's a huge museum as well, the Keltenwelt, Celtic World, and there's an old Celtic castle on the hill over the museum, and it's really fascinating to go there.
Oh,
So
great. Yeah, definitely. When I go back, I'll check
yeah,
it
so make
out.
yourself known, and
Yeah.
possible to do some amazing things there. Um, yeah, that's also something which always was interesting for me because I dealt with pagan and mythical stuff from childhood on. It was
Yeah.
very usual to, as a child, to read the mythological stories of the past.
Yeah.
My mother was a teacher and she gave me all those classical books. I doubt that it happens today
Sure.
because people are not aware of this. I have to
Yeah.
explain my students who are like 20, I have to explain a lot of these stories, be it from the Bible or from the Edda. It's
Really?
they know nothing about these metaphors based on mythology, which are used like in
Sure.
Marvel universe, in DC
Yeah.
universe, because I mean, they think, okay, Thor is somehow taken from Germanic mythology, but how close some things are, and it's not always interesting. It's sometimes it's really like strange, but um, you have to know these things to
Yeah.
even deal with it. Mm,
The basic archetypes.
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
the archetypes
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a thing which is also important to understand, probably to understand the music we make as well, I
I
would
think
think.
so.
Mm.
I think so. Yeah, there's there's kind of a Jungian element to a
Absolutely.
lot of the
Yeah.
music
Yeah.
in these genres.
Hmm.
Yeah. There's that deep well of the collective unconscious that it draws
Absolutely.
from.
Yeah.
And,
And that's
yeah.
why I mentioned the vortex. The vortex is connected to this probably cultural subconscious,
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
is which you refer to now. Yeah.
And that's rich. And if you can tap into that and be genuine with it, there's so much that's inspirational. So I
Yeah,
recommend people getting into that.
absolutely, I agree. And probably to come slowly towards an end of our talk, which is quite
Sure.
fascinating, and I hope we will continue someday. And
Yeah.
but it's very important. What are you planning for the near future? What are you doing at the moment? Are there any projects for to know for us?
Yeah. Well, we have a new album that's completed now, and we're just trying to see about getting a physical release for it. We arranged it to be a vinyl record, a 12-inch vinyl record, and it's just trying to find somebody that's able to put it out or putting it out ourselves. Just making those decisions is going to be the thing, because previous releases have been through Treasel, but they're only putting out physical copies of albums now for just a few artists on their label. And that's, again, back to the conversation we were talking about the record producing plants and how expensive it is and how difficult it is and how people are on a backlog now with their projects to get their records pressed. I guess that's a factor in there. So that's the main thing that I want to do. The end of this year, beginning of the next year is finally get that record put out. We're still working on new music as well, and I'd love to come back to Europe and do some shows now that it's, things of COVID messed things up for several years. It's not gone away, but it's seems more manageable now to do some things, and I hope it stays that way and we can return.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Maybe we can meet in person.
Sure.
That'd
be fantastic. Yeah.
Absolutely. And for my side, we are preparing an album with Vortex called Acephal, which was a magazine run by Georges Bataille and Michel Héris and other people during the era of surrealism. And they thought about radical things like committing human sacrifice, for example. Bataille wanted to volunteer, and their god was the headless god, Acephal, no head. And they had this great image by André Masson with the headless,
with the arms out, and
it
was like, I think there's a flame over the torso, right?
Yeah.
He's got a knife in one hand, and what's in the other? There's something else in the other.
I have to try the artwork. I put it down to work with this artwork. Yeah,
that's a great image. I know what you mean.
Yeah, and so this album will be out on Cyclic Law, like all Vortex albums, and it will focus on Bataille's philosophy and also feature French vocals by David, the guy from Dawn and Dusk Entwined. Might be also interesting for some proper French vocals. I couldn't do that. And
that's a respectable project right there. Yeah, I like Dawn and Dusk Entwined.
Absolutely, yeah. I collaborated with them when we did Golgotha and Dawn and Dusk Entwined for the record Sangral about the Grail mythology, which came out on Cold Meat Industry.
I have that.
You have that.
That's a good album. It's a good album.
Yeah. So half of it was made by myself and my first band. Yeah.
Great.
So that's one thing. And we have another collaboration coming up with the Buddhist-based ritual band Namkar, also located in the Frankfurt area, actually. And we did one record on the Nag Hammadi scriptures. The apocryphic scriptures. There is one album out, and the next one will be called the Sarajevo Spiral, on the results from the First World War and the cultural crisis of the 20s. Wow. So we have a connection between the 20s of 100 years ago and now, which is not new, obviously, but it's very much like cultural, philosophical aspects. And this will also be out early next year, I guess. So these are in the works at the moment.
Anything to do with Junger and that project? I've been reading The Storms of Steel lately.
You are right, but we go the different way. We will deal with Sigmund Freud's writings on cultural crisis, because Sigmund Freud was really prophetical in what he wrote about the human condition at that time. So that time, at this time, it's about Freud.
Okay, great. Yeah, fantastic.
So I will let you know about this. And we started actually this a podcast with a song by AWEN, which you sent me, and now we will finish this podcast with a song from the Helios album, which I did together with Lamia Vox, the Russian-based artist now living in Prague, and very well known probably for her own great records of ritual music. And the song is Man of Fire. And you will now listen to this. And Erin, it was great to talk to you. Hope to do it
Fantastic
again.
speaking.
And I hope people have enjoyed what we remembered about our past. There were many more things to talk about anyway.
Sure.
And
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation.
yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Right, goodbye.
The same game, survival. Great mass play, a waiting game. Bombed and crippled, dying in fear of pain. All sense of freedom gone. This is like a black sun in a white world. Give me 69 years, another season in this hell. It's all sex and death as far as eyes can tell. Prometheus, we are bound, chained to this rock of a brave new world. Our God-forsaken lot.